Hi, everyone. My name is Raj Ajrawat. I'm a product specialist here at Google Play. Welcome to Playtime. Thank you all for being here today. I'd like to actually introduce both Mark and Jim before we go ahead and get started. So, Mark, if you can go ahead and introduce yourself, and we'll go from there.
Hi, everyone. I'm Mark Panelo. I'm the Senior Director of Business Development at Kabam, and I lead platform partnership strategy and operations.
And I'm Jim Stern, General Manager of the Casual Cards Division at Zynga, working on global games like Solitaire and Gin Rummy Plus that have an emergence or presence in the emerging market, as well as some games that are just in the emerging markets.
Thank you both for being here today. We're really happy to have you guys up here. So in order to set up the discussion, the panel for today, I wanted to just talk about what we mean when we talk about emerging markets. Now, given the audience, given the context, when we say emerging markets up here, we're talking really any non-Western, non-US market, so essentially the rest of the world. There's a lot of economic definitions for that, and you might have users in particular countries, but really what we mean is any user that's not US, UK, Canada. The other thing to call out too is when we were actually sitting here and talking with our team about how we wanted to structure the session, we wanted to talk more about how you can find success in emerging markets. I think it would be a little bit disingenuous for us to come up here and talk about how to approach an emerging market, because many of you already have users that are there, and you're either deciding how to react to them at this moment or how to potentially drive more business from them. Now, given all of that, we have three different things that we're going to be talking about, three different topics that we're going to focus on. The first being pricing and monetization. So how do you price your goods and services to these users? What are some strategies or some challenges that come with that? The second one is around localization. So not just translating your app or your game, but being culturally relevant, being culturally aware of your users. And then the third one is the technical challenges. What did you have to overcome from a technical perspective in order to launch in a particular market? So starting off with pricing and monetization, Mark, I'd like to actually call on you in terms of the work that you guys have done in terms of pricing. Give us a sense for some of the challenges you guys faced when it comes to how you sell your goods, how you sell your games to users in those markets. What were some ideas that you guys started off with, and then what were some solutions that you went forward with?
Yeah, sure. So at Kabam, we pride ourselves on a really robust live ops program and strategy, and included in that is a lot of different strategies that we try to implement, especially with pricing sensitivity analysis and testing. For example, for India and for Brazil, not only do we have our standard global pricing on our paywall, but we actually put low price entry points, IAP entry points, that's a little bit more affordable for those markets. We did see a uplift in the purchase velocity for those lower price IAPs, but we thought we could do more. So we reached out to Google Play to see whether or not they could help us get more best practice information for India and Brazil. So we met with Daniel in the Brazil team, and he actually mentioned that our pricing strategy in the Brazil market is pretty appropriate. Then we talked to Kanan in the Google India team, and she mentioned that we're still a little bit we're too expensive for that region. So what we did is, instead of putting a sub $1 pricing, USD pricing equivalent in India, we did something a little bit lower. We did a 10 rupee offer, which equates to around 15 cents USD. Right. And while it was priced really low, we did make it up in volume too. So there's no one size fits all for emerging markets, but we just got to test different price points.
Yeah, for sure. And Jim, with you guys as well, with some of the markets you're approaching, how did you think about that?
Yeah, also I have to kind of take a look at it from a different perspective, which is just taking a look at what the cultural and worldwide events are that are going on that you have to be aware of. So, for example, with our games in Turkey, there's Ramadan and Eid, which is very important, and so we want to make sure that we want to encourage the gameplay during that time period. So we'll put special sales on during that time period, but won't run any special UA campaigns because we know we won't get that kind of return during that time period. And then other things like VAT tax. At the beginning of the year, we started charging VAT on top of all of the packages that we had. And we had to be really aware of what the impact of that was going to be on the players, especially on the lower end, the entry points. because on the Google side at least, there's no pricing tiers, so we can actually set up whatever we need to. And on the Apple side, there are. So we have to figure out what kinds of items we want to put in there that will entice them more, or how we even pop up those messages to get some of those early players on board. And then I'd say finally one other global perspective is even taking a look at the local currency. So in the case of Turkey, where we've got a big presence, over this last year, there's been a huge devaluation in the market. And what you need to take a look at there then is how do you make sure that you're being sensitive to what's going on there? Do you put on sales? Do you actually reprice what you're doing at that time? Or do you try to come up with alternative packages like rewarded videos, where they don't have to spend as much during the time where the lira's a lot lower, and really make sure that they're able to still continue to play.
So I want to actually follow up on that too. So this is interesting. You're having to think about like geopolitical issues that are happening around the world to understand like currency devaluation. What did you guys decide to do in that moment? Did you move with rewarded video? Did you change the pricing? Like how did you actually react to that?
No, so what we figured was it was really important to watch what was going on in the market, and because these are lower price point entry, it doesn't really impact that part of the business as much. So we decided to wait and see what would happen, and things actually turned out fine in terms of what players were interested in being able to engage in the game. And it's the one piece that I think is really important. Don't react quickly and don't say, okay, I'm going to reprice everything right away. Right. Sit, wait, see what's going to happen, and make sure that you're really listening to what the players want.
That's great. And Mark, I wanted to actually touch on something you were talking about previously. We gave you guys advice around what kind of pricing makes sense in particular markets. Have you done any testing beyond that in terms of maybe even adjusting up or below what we talked about previously, or has there been like any sort of A/B testing that you guys have done with that?
Yeah, I mean, we A/B test everything, but outside of pricing, we actually do, because like we create the Marvel Contest of Champions game, we know what characters kind of resonate in certain markets as well. So we actually do, when we look at our offers that we do in those different markets, we actually look at which characters and which packages makes more sense for that region. So we do, outside of pricing, we do tailor it culturally too for the market.
Awesome. That's actually, so taking that discussion now, I'd actually like to transition to this idea of localization. So probably about 6 years ago or 5 years ago, I would have just told you to translate your app and then call it a day. That's completely changed, right? It's not just about translating to Spanish or Mandarin or Portuguese. It's about running sales during Eid or doing something specific to those particular markets. Jim, let's talk about some of the work you guys did with Oki in Turkey. Understanding sort of how you guys first approached that market, thought about the way you wanted to set up the game, and then some of the things that you did in terms of actually delivering content to users there. It'd be great to just walk through all of that.
Okay. Yeah, OK is a tile-based gin game similar to Rummikub. And it's very popular. It's very traditional in their card houses there. So people have been playing it for years. And they play socially. They play for money. There's a lot that goes on around that as a community. So we figured let's tap into something that actually resonates with that community. There are 80 million or so people in Turkey, and there's a large portion that actually play the game as well. So our first important thing to do was make sure that we had synchronous gameplay. And just set it up that way. How do you make it so that people can get on, 2 players, 3 players, 4 players? On top of that, we then added community and customer service. And with the customer service, it was important to have people who were from Turkey, knew not only how to speak the language, like you're saying, don't worry about necessarily just the translation, but really understood the mentality of people who play the game and what they're looking for. And then we finally added a component on top of that where they could wager for chips and really get that additional excitement around it. And what was important, I think, throughout this whole thing was the timing, the pacing of the game, what the tiles look like, even your avatar and canned phrases that weren't just translated through some app, but things that were typically known within that particular culture.
Yeah, there was one partner we were talking to before the panel, and she was mentioning how they leverage their community inside the app. So they have a very strong, passionate user base that actually just volunteer their time. They were given a space in terms of becoming like a brand ambassador or an app ambassador for them. And they actually reach out to these users in particular markets as the individual that represents that country. It makes the user feel extremely happy to have that honor, especially if they love the service or they love the app. But they essentially become like a sounding board for any changes that could happen in that local market. So much like what we did with Daniel and Kanan in India and in Brazil, they sort of act as like the individual that you can reach out to and say, hey, we're trying to get this message across. Does this make sense? Is this the right messaging that we want to say? And in many times they'll actually come back and say, no, you mean to say this instead.
Yeah.
So it's a good check on a lot of the work that they're doing in terms of approaching those markets. And it's ideally somewhat lightweight in terms of leveraging those resources, leveraging your users to actually get that information. But Mark, how have you guys thought about culturalization, localization for your offerings?
So there's something interesting that we do. Kabam, we actually have really deep roots with UC Berkeley, and what we've been doing, like all of our founders came from Cal, and what we did with them is we partnered with the Haas Business School to do a research competition to see which markets outside of the tier ones have the highest growth potential, and there's a bigger opportunity there. So it's no surprise that both India and Brazil, as well as like Southeast Asia, came up in the research. So right now we're actually moving to phase 2. And phase 2, actually, we're going to be partnering with the university in India to go a little bit more deeper on not only just like the game market over there, but also the game tech and the player profile. And the reason why we're doing that with the university in India is because we identified them as a growth market and an emerging market. Those people are on the ground there. So that's why we wanted to do that. So that's how we're kind of learning from the folks over there on the ground.
Interesting. I don't know if you can say this. Is this like a financial relationship, or is it just purely research, or how does it?
Pure
how is that
research.
structured?
I mean, we're partnering with the universities. We're giving them. There's a prize for whoever wins.
Nice.
So it just helps with their tuition. So.
Okay, that's great. So I mean, I think that there's a lot of these different things to think about when you're obviously trying to sell your specific service to these markets. I'd like to potentially now transition to some of these technical issues that a lot of our partners face. And actually, we were talking previously to the panel that even size can be a big issue. So, Jim, walk us through some of the technical things that you had to think about before you approached the market, or also just technical issues that you might have encountered before after you entered.
That we were surprised about later.
Right, that you were surprised about. And how did you react to them? How did you guys build in Flex to be able to address those issues for your users as well?
So we had a couple of different things going on with a few of our games. So in the case of OK that I was talking about, it's predominantly played in Turkey, and the closest AWS server that we could get was in Germany. So there were some latency issues, not horrible, but we were able to find servers that were local within Turkey that were price competitive as well, that actually were much better in terms of the latency issue. So we were able to hook them up over there. We've also had situations like with poker where we thought, okay, this is a global game. How do we target the particular emerging markets? Let's segment the servers based off of the different languages or the different countries where the people are playing. And we found that actually had an issue on liquidity, that people weren't able to find other players because they were on different servers. So to accommodate for that, we put everybody back into a single set of servers again. And in order to customize the game for them, we tried to give them customized events that we would customize for that particular culture, but then make something else that was a little bit more generic for the rest of the world. And then in the case of Rangoli Rekha, which is a match 3 game that we did in India, it was very important that we knew the customer base. So it's predominantly Android, so we focused on Android. They don't have the same access to Wi-Fi, so we had to make sure that the file size was down, so we kept it to 20 megs. And based on the research that we had done, we found that up to 40% of the people find other file share servers to go to download the game. So we made sure it was accessible through services like FireShare in order to for them to be able to download their games.
Now, Mark, did you guys have any similar issues around size or anything like that, or is that a consideration for you guys?
It's definitely a huge consideration. So 4 years ago, when Marvel Contest of Champions launched, players actually had to be on Wi-Fi in order to download the game. The game's huge. I'll probably say like on device around like 700 megabytes. So you could see that could be a hurdle for acquisition. So we, shortly after that, we had to quickly pivot our central tech strategy. So what we did is we made our initial download sub 100 megabytes. And what that did for us is enabled players to download the game over cellular. And while they're playing through the tutorial, our game leverages on-demand resources to download the rest of the package. So not only did we see optimization in our yields and our CPIs, but also it made our game more accessible in the emerging markets where the infrastructure wasn't really fully developed and Wi-Fi wasn't readily available.
Yeah, and I think that highlights a lot of what we were talking about earlier today when you saw Dom up here on stage, why we're so focused on size reduction. You can see the benefits around actually taking this type of model, a more modular approach, more dynamically loading content. And that's really why we built the bundle. That's why we built that technology. And I can't reiterate that enough. I think we've seen a lot of partners report to us how important that's been for their business. And just something so simple as size reduction can really drive that. Now, were there any technical challenges that you had to overcome through that size reduction or through that kind of dynamically loading information that maybe you could share some details on?
In terms of the actual tech, gosh, I'm not an engineer. I really can't tell you all the details, but it was definitely not an easy process. I think the time that we said we need to do this versus when we actually executed was a good 6 months. So I would say if you're starting off from a full package download to actually changing your strategy and doing an initial download, take some time to think through it.
Yeah, and that's a good thing to call out too. I think when we have these conversations with our partners, a lot of times it's not just a quick change that you can put into place. Right. This is really an architecture decision at the end of the day, and you kind of have to leverage a lot of resources to make that happen. So that kind of definitely lines up with a lot of the things that we're talking to partners about, but. I'd like to maybe just take stock of a lot of these ideas, and if you could maybe talk about one or two things that you'd want the audience to take away from, something that we can hopefully take away as an actionable item that they can test back home with some of their colleagues. Jim, maybe we'll start with you. What are a few things that you can talk about that if you're trying to prioritize these items and these tasks, what are things that they can do to try and find success in these markets?
I'd say first and foremost, if you're looking to do a game or an application in a particular market, make sure you've really done your research to know what are the traditions there, what do people glom onto, why do they do it. The more you can actually have it built there as well, where the people know the traditions, they know the culture, it's much better because even the subtleties that they put into the game make an incredible difference. Same like I was talking about before, customer service, have it there. They'll understand how to talk with the people there, how to communicate with them. And I wouldn't just segment it, I guess, to creating an app for a particular market, but if you have a larger app that is global, how do you tap into those emerging markets? And in some cases, it is customizing events or sales or whatever it is that you want to put out to them. It will cost a little bit more, it'll take more time to put together, but they value that, and they really enjoy seeing that they're an important piece to what's going on. You can also get into those emerging markets if you're worldwide, because like I was talking about with liquidity, there may be these smaller countries where you don't have, it's not profitable enough for you to build something just for that, but you can tap into it by leveraging all the rest of the other people. So don't just ignore emerging markets because you don't think you can get into it. Leverage everything else that you're doing in terms of rest of the world.
Yeah, and Mark, I think if you could give us maybe a few things to think about as well.
Yeah, from a pricing perspective, I would just say A/B test everything. Sometimes the biggest wins and learnings come out of trial and error. But I guess my more general takeaway and advice I could give is to don't be afraid to ask for help and leverage your external resources, whether it's Google Play or local universities or even your peers in the industry. chances are you'll learn something about emerging markets that you didn't know, and the advice is free too.
Yep, definitely. Awesome. Well, thank you both for being up here today. Super helpful, and we really appreciate you guys sharing this detail. And actually, one more thing I wanted to call out too. So there's a new feature that we had talked about earlier that's launching on the Play console, which is called country targeting. So for those of you who've used locale targeting previously, you might have had some issues where users, for example, in India, they set their phones to English US, and so you're not necessarily able to actually deliver content that's specific to a particular market. But we currently have that in an early access program, and so I'd love for everyone to take a look. If you go to g.co/play/country targeting. Again, that URL is g.co/play/country targeting. Thank you both.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.